So recently I've discussed making a video dedicated to taking a look at the mysterious events swirling around Ichigo over the last couple of episodes of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. And considering that as of episode 17, Heart of Wolf, Ichigo seems to have finished his training with Ichibei, at least for the time being, now seems like the best chance to discuss what we've seen and learned so far. Ichigo's training was unique, to say the least, and unlike anything we'd seen before, but I suppose that's to be expected now that we are firmly trespassing on the realm of the Soul King himself, at long last. Ichibei, who himself is the almost ancient divine leader of the Zero Division, pushed our protagonist to go beyond his limits and surpass what it means to be an ordinary Shinigami by forcing him along the long road of Irazu Sando, a strange, mystical, quasi-religious pathway over the course of which the weight of Ichigo's quarry and his desire to protect came bearing down upon him. Along with this weight, Ichigo experienced various flashes of memory and revelation, as though Ryo himself were attempting to communicate with him. For me, someone who was mostly satisfied with the 1000-Year Blood War arc in its original incarnation, this is all extremely exciting stuff, and a part of me can't believe we're seemingly getting the Soul King's long-awaited history, even though I've consistently placed it near or at the very top of my wishes for what we might see in this new anime adaptation. It's one of the few gaping holes left in the source material, to the point where getting it now feels like genuine wish fulfillment, and it's one that was deemed important enough to be filled in thanks to the light novel Can't Fear Your Own World. But I have always hoped that we would one day see this played out, that we would actually get to see Ryo as a fully fleshed out figure within the world of Bleach, that we might actually get to witness the primordial world before it was torn asunder. And thanks to this latest training of Ichigo's, that dream is closer to becoming a reality. But what's actually going on here? What did Ichigo see in those various images that zipped past, and what can we as viewers glean from them? Can a timeline of events be created? Well, we're going to try and piece it all together in today's video. Before we get started on the video, however, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, when you're done with it, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support from me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well. And as always, I want to say a massive shout out and a huge thank you to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. And yes, there will be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach, and even beyond that, in this video to come. To this day, the Soul King remains the biggest mystery in Bleach, something I've opined a number of times before on the channel. Who was he? What was he? What was the primordial world he existed in really like? How did he come to be? And how did he split the original world into the worlds we know today just by using the power that we know to be the Almighty? How exactly did the ancestors of the 5 noble houses imprison and mutilate him? And how does he have a son, Yhwach? The anime has already given us the tiniest of speculative breadcrumbs in regards to that last point, in so much as implying at least that Yhwach had a mother or a mother-like figure. But whether this figure represents a literal mother or some kind of a destined cosmic Ryoku-based concept is unclear. And when it came to the source material, we unfortunately learned next to nothing about the Soul King himself, save for the fact that clearly his limbs had been removed from him at some point and had since gained sentience of their own, and that his supposed role in the universe of Bleach was to regulate the flow of souls. We also had the tiniest of hints that Yhwach himself saw the Soul King as already being long dead and wanted to end his humiliation, and that the Soul King, or at least the main body of the Soul King, saw the Shinigami as his enemies. But I mean, outside of that, we knew nothing about this peculiar mannequin-like being who supposedly ruled over all of the Soul Society. And as quickly as he came into the story, he was killed and supplanted by his son Yhwach, who would then begin the final showdown. So already here in Core 2 of the anime, I feel like we've learned more than we ever really did. And I want to reiterate once more that Ichigo's training sequence with Ichibei is not present in any shape or form in the source material, and he does not know the truth of the Soul King, at least as far as we're aware. In my opinion, then, this is the biggest change or addition to the original story the anime has thus far made, and to be honest with you, I think this is just the beginning. So, what did Ichigo see on the unapproachable path? As he takes a tentative step forward, a wave of power seems to rush towards and then wash over him, and we see several images flash past his eyes. These grainy, somewhat difficult to decipher images seem altogether to depict the secret history of the Soul King himself, focusing specifically on his destruction. Later, when Ichigo bears the brunt of the Soul King's own power, he sees various additional images, including flashes of the war from 1,000 years ago and Ryo's current state of imprisonment. Now that's all well and good, but I mean, what's actually going on in these images? Well, I think the shots appear in the correct order of the sequence of events, and therefore I've tried my best to understand this scene to get some temporary answers. But remember that this is purely speculation on my part until we hopefully learn more in the future. To be honest, I'm just so glad we can make this video at all. But anyway, here is what I think is happening here, or at least here's a couple of theories. The first one I am no longer that convinced by, while the second one I actually think has a pretty decent shot at being what's actually going down here. But firstly, we simply see the water. Still and unmoving, this pool of shallow water is our first ever look at what we can assume is the primordial world of Bleach. We next see a mysterious figure wading through the water. The figure is wearing what looks like a plain white shihakusho and has short black hair. And this has to be none other than the Soul King himself, in our first look at him as a, well, complete person. This is presumably from before he was even known as the Soul King. Kubo did mention that he has an actual name, and that we may hear it ourselves later, which gets me very, very hopeful that this isn't the last of the Soul King's flashbacks we'll actually see. The Soul King is carrying what looks like a sword in his arms as he wades into the centre of the water. We get both a distant view of him from afar, and then a much closer one as well, as he takes a step beyond what looks to be a black and white striped arrow. Speaking of which, we then see a shot of 3 arrows embedded into the ground, just below the surface of what looks like the fairly shallow body of water, the same place that Ryo is in. These arrows make up a triangle formation. Now, already the questions begin. We have no idea what this is, what it means, outside of it presumably being some kind of ancient ritual, or how it works, or anything like that. I'm surprised the arrows appear to be actual, tangible arrows, rather than the Quincy arrows of Reishi that we're used to. Perhaps this is to emphasize just how old this scene is. But I mean, if it's as old as we're supposed to believe it to be, roughly 1,000,000 years ago in fact, I'm surprised to see an arrow at all. Also, who fired them into the ground, or who placed them into the ground in the first place? Was it Ryo? We then get a closer look at what Ryo is actually holding when he places it into the water in front of him. Rather than a sword, the relic appears to be some kind of a key or ancient artifact that helps Ryo to initiate the ritual as follows. Whatever it is, Ryo holds it by a curved handle at the very base of the relic, plunging it into the water. One additional small note of interest. We can see that Ryo is wielding this relic with his right arm, and we can even make out what looks to be a small marking or incision on the back of his hand. And of course, we know that Mimihagi bears its great eye on the back of its hand, whereas Pernida's eye is on the inside, on the palm. Is this marking on the back of Ryo's hand somehow related to Mimihagi? I presume it probably is. Is it an actual eye? Can it actually open on his hand? We have absolutely no idea. Maybe it's just literally a marking, but for now, it's a cool little connection. Also, does Ryo's arm in this moment currently govern stillness? If so, that might go some length to explain the true nature of this ritual, which we'll get into in the second theory. And then as the Soul King places the key into the water, a whirlpool forms around him, and 3 other whirlpools spring into life as well around him in a triangular formation. Each additional whirlpool seems to be revolving around one of the 3 arrows buried in the water's bed. So for my first theory, the one that I'm no longer really that convinced by, I theorized before in my reviews of the last couple of episodes that this moment is when the Soul King split the world using the Almighty, with each of the different whirlpools representing one of the different worlds that would then be born. But things after this get a little weird, and after more examination of these images, I have better reason to believe that what we're seeing is far more literal than conceptual than I had first anticipated, and so I have a second theory about what's going on that, like I said, I think I actually prefer now. You see, we know from Can't Fear Your Own World that the Soul King allowed himself to be imprisoned by the 5 ancestors of the noble houses, presumably because he was able to see so far into the future that he knew the time would come when someone would rise up to avenge him. We also know that despite his cooperation with them, the ancestors continued to distrust and fear him and his immeasurable power, and so forcibly removed his limbs and organs, leaving him in a suspended state between life and death, a divine torture that would last an eternity. What we don't know is how they removed his limbs and organs. So here's another theory, the one that I actually prefer, one that fits better with some of the other images we'll see a little later as well. What if the ritual we're seeing here that's being shown to Ichigo isn't to split the worlds at all, but to seal the Soul King away? Perhaps the Soul King has already agreed to his imprisonment at this point, and we see him essentially marching to his doom as he wades into the water, carrying the instrument of his own destruction, whatever it is. Having the Soul King himself be the one to initiate the ritual that would imprison him is probably the most concrete assurance that he's actually allowing you to do this after all. And I really like the idea of the Soul King basically being like, look, I will seal myself away so you can trust that it's actually happening. And so perhaps that's what the Soul King thought was going to happen here, but what if the ancestors then betrayed him, committing what would come to be known as the original sin? What if, supposedly unknown to Reo beforehand, though of course he does have the Almighty, the process of sealing him away also pulled his body apart at the same time? The reason I front this as a possible theory is that once Reo seemingly activates the ritual and the whirlpools appear, we see the following images in sequence. The 3 arrows surrounding him begin to glow brilliantly, as if appearing like the Quincy arrows that we're more familiar with. And then the Soul King's arms break away from his body, falling into the water below, the right arm still gripping the relic that was used to initiate the seal. If we follow the story as presented in Can't Fear Your Own World, then the king consented to being sealed, but not to his mutilation. That came as a result of the ancestors not trusting him or his power. So if he is being sealed here too, then the loss of his limbs would have been a surprise to him, save for the fact, like I said, he could likely see what they were going to do in the future anyway. After this, the Soul King's limbs are scattered, with the right arm still holding on to the relic. If this relic is what helped to imprison the Soul King in the first place, then it makes sense that the right arm is the one to wield it, as like I said, it governs the power of stillness, and what's more still than Reo being trapped in the same place for eternity? What if this power of stillness inherently comes from the right arm being forever combined with this artifact that helped imprison Reo's main body? We even see a shot of Reo's right arm now submerged beneath the water, as though it's simply dropped beside him into the pool. Initially, again, I thought this next image was a conceptual one, designed to show the incredible hellish torment of Reo, as though he were consumed by fire, but actually I think it might be a little deceptive. I think it might just be what's left of Reo's body falling over into the water, and we can even still see his individual limbs potentially floating in the water on either side of him. Then the shots we see afterwards, while less clear than the ones that came before, we can just about make them out to be, with the new context we have, his floating body as he watches his now separated limbs sail past him beneath the water's surface. The first image is from underneath him, where we can see his face as he lies in the water looking down, watching his arms float past, and then the next image is from above, where we're looking at his bare back, at what remains of him now his limbs have been stolen away. A limp, nearly lifeless torso simply floating on the water's surface. So the images then of Ryo's separated limbs. Originally I thought these were just conceptual abstract images vaguely adhering to the idea that Ryo had his arms and legs stolen from him, which is what I think set me down the wrong path initially. The fact, however, that his right arm is still clinging onto this strange relic tells me the scenes are indeed actually connected, however. Although only a silhouette, we see the Soul King holding onto the relic's handle as his arms just fall away. Again, I originally thought this was just a figurative image, but what if it isn't? What if that's actually how it happened? Another image that backs this up is again a later one of his right arm, still clutching the relic that sealed him away, only this time the arm is submerged underwater. And this feels to me like the most surefire evidence that all of this is actually taking place at the same time. Ryo initiated his seal by turning the key, only for his limbs to break apart and fall away from him. Now again, this is a little bit weird, as we know the right arm of Ryo falls to earth at some point. I mean, maybe it was simply discarded by the ancestors, or it fell during the splitting of the worlds, which was maybe still taking place. However, based on what I think kind of maybe happens after this, I imagine the ancestors just picked up his limbs and tossed them over the side. And of course, how does this all play into Ichigo's training? In the latest episode, Ichigo is put through his toughest test yet, as the entire weight of his desire to protect the world is thrust upon his shoulders. And suddenly the Soul King's own incredible power is pumped into him, with various visions flashing through his mind at an alarming rate. There could be multiple things going on here, but my original theory again went back to this idea that Ryo was splitting the worlds, and it centered around the idea that Ichigo claims to want to protect the world. All worlds, in fact, as Yhwach will later chastise him for being so arrogant as to claim to be able to do so. And Ichibei chooses to put that resolve to the test by showing Ichigo how these worlds came to be in the first place, and the weight of that new revelation is what's weighing Ichigo down. But if we go with the idea that the second theory is more likely, what if Ichigo is being shown the original sin in its entirety, the imprisonment and further betrayal and mutilation of Ryo? Then perhaps he's experiencing a fraction of the immense pain that Ryo has had to endure for 1,000,000 years. If Ichigo wants to protect this world, then he should at least know the pain and suffering it was born out of. And then of course there's the slightly more simplistic angle that Ichibei is testing to see if Ichigo is capable of becoming an unwitting replacement for Ryo as well, which definitely seems likely. And of course, crucially, there's no reason why the two can't be happening together, it's just one of them is Ichibei's ulterior contingency motive. So then, before we go, a quick breakdown of the events that Ichigo witnesses, known as the original sin of Soul Society, to help try and kind of condense my thoughts, which have really been all over the place in this video. So the being that would be known as the Soul King wades through some water, carrying an ancient relic in his arms. He passes by several black and white striped arrows before coming to a stop in the center of 3 of them. Ryo places the artifact into the water in front of him, and a whirlpool appears. Whirlpools also appear around the 3 arrows as they begin to glow with a fierce light. As the arrows glow, Ryo's arms break away from his body, his right arm still clutching the relic. The Soul King's limbs are then scattered. We see his right arm submerged in water, still holding on to the key. What's left of Ryo then topples over into the water, and he watches helplessly as his arms and legs float past him, disappearing forever after this betrayal. And how does this compare with what we learned from Can't Fear Your Own World? Fairly well, though I don't think it lines up perfectly. In the light novel, it does seem like the Soul King was sealed up in his crystal before his limbs were removed, but here that doesn't seem to be the case. That being said, I could definitely see the anime taking some liberties and even telling their own definitive version of Ryo's tragic past. While we don't know for sure, it seems likely to me that in the anime's version, the ancestors will then take Ryo's helpless torso from the water and imprison it within the crystal. But we'll have to wait to find out more to know the truth for certain. But for now, this second theory, the one I've just laid out to you, I'm pretty happy with overall. I think Ichigo is witnessing the original sin that was committed by the ancestors of Soul Society itself. They tricked and betrayed Ryo. Although again, I don't know how you trick someone who has the Almighty, but it would seem to be the case, as Ryo consented to being imprisoned, not to being mutilated, but it certainly seems from these images that they too may in fact be the same, or at least he seemed to initiate a seal that would instead destroy his own body. Either way, I cannot wait to learn more, to get more concrete answers regarding my biggest question surrounding Bleach. This is everything I really wanted to see from the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime, so I hope they keep it up, and I hope they really just give us kind of every answer we've wanted, especially regarding the Soul King. It seems like they're already on that path, so I'm very hopeful for more in the future. But that's it for the video, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my theories around what Ichigo was seeing, what he was witnessing the Soul King's secret past potentially being teased, potentially being slowly revealed to us. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. This has been something of a ramble. I've tried to condense my thoughts into as neat a way as possible, but it's quite difficult to do, especially when I've got so much on my mind regarding the Soul King, regarding his history. And I've kind of been bowled over by the fact we've been given already as much as we have. So either way, I'm very excited to see this. I hope you are as well. Do let me know in the comments below what you think. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.